Welcome to Movie Bounce with Mike and Harry, where we'll bounce from movie to movie.
From actor, writer, director, any which way.
Who knows where we'll bounce to next?
Hi, everybody. It's Mike here.
It's Harry.
And what movie are we going to be bouncing to today, Harry?
We're going to bounce ourselves onto The Rock.
But before we talk about The Rock, the conversation it occurred back in June of 2020. But today we're talking in November 2020. A little bit confusing. This is very Back to the Future of us to do, right, Harry?
Yep.
But we got to talk more about what's going on today because there's been this huge news that hit. It is now November 19th, 2020. And the news that dropped is that Wonder Woman 1984, I think it's 84, right?
Right.
It had been, instead of being released in theaters in December 25th, it will be actually dropping in theaters, but it's also going to be released on HBO Max, day and date. What was your initial reaction when you heard about this, Eric?
So I thought it was interesting, not necessarily that that's the play they're going to take, because obviously we've seen it happen before. You know, these studios need to get their content out there. I did think it was interesting that they're going to do a dual launch where you could see it in the theater or you can watch it on HBO Max. And, AMC in particular pretty much said that they're totally fine with it. They had good things to say about it. They're really playing up the partnership angle. And to me, I do think that makes sense. I think at this point now, they have to make sure they're playing nice in the sandbox a bit. And I think, also there are going to be people who want to see it in the theater, and that option is there for them. And there would be people who probably wouldn't go and see it in the theater. So no matter what, they have an option too. So it's a win-win. It's certainly more win for Warner, but I'm glad to see that AMC isn't like stamping their feet and they're willing to kind of go with the flow.
That's great that they're doing it. We don't know if Regal will be doing the same. I think most likely they will. We'll see how it plays out because we know that with Bill and Ted Face the Music, they had done something very similar, but the only theater distribution they were able to get wasn't AMC, wasn't Regal. It was drive-in movie theaters, and that didn't really do too much to bring much money in on that front. It was moderately profitable. Huh?
At that time, I didn't think there were as many theaters open. I think it's a little different now.
It was the weekend
But
where
I'm
it just opened.
Right. But yeah, I was actually curious. So when I heard the news, I really wanted to hear what you thought about it, because I'm looking at it from one angle, but I want, you to school me a bit on, does this make sense for AMC? Like, what does this portend?
Well, I'm thinking about, Warner Brothers made this decision. They released Tenet. It only made, so far as of today, a little bit over $350 million worldwide. That's a budget of $200 million, I believe, not counting marketing, and not counting the cut that the theater chains get out of it. And the thing is, the movie Tenet was expected to make it probably around the 700, 800 million range worldwide, just due to Nolan's track record. So Warner took a huge hit. And the question I have is that, and the reason why I was the most surprised when I heard this is because, well, first of all, there's news. We don't talk too much about COVID, but we'll talk about it briefly, is that there's news of a vaccine coming out. And there's potential, and you can already see the fact that that's light at the end of the tunnel, where more films, more studios are ready to release their films in 2021. And that being said, there's going to be a huge summer next year. After like May, I assume, when things kick into high gear, like almost feels like almost every weekend, or you're going to have a huge blockbuster. That's exciting for me as a moviegoer. But the question that I have, because I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of Warner Brothers, is, like I said, Tenet made only $350 million worldwide. They have investors that, they were pretty much sold on the fact that Tenet would have made, somewhere in the range of 700, 800 million. Same thing goes with Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman, when it was released in 2017, made, I believe, over $700 million worldwide, more than that. So, of course, investors who put their money into Wonder Woman 84 think, oh, we're going to get a huge return off this. So for Warner to drop on streaming, how are you going to, like, if their Wonder Woman 84 is expected to make at least maybe 700, 800 million worldwide, you're not going to make that through streaming. But of course, Warner Brothers is doing this for HBO Max. They have a huge library with HBO Max, and they can make a huge amount in terms of subscribers. But is that going to amount to 700, 800 million? Are they going to even come close to breaking even? doesn't make sense really from my standpoint, from my point of view. But hey, it's not my
Yeah.
money. It's not my money. But the thing is, they're thinking long term because recently we've also heard a few weeks ago that Disney is bullish on streaming. So HBO Max, Warner knows this, so they go, okay, well, we don't want Disney to take all the, they have a huge library. They tap into the kids, and HBO Max does have a few. They've got Studio Ghibli, but that doesn't tap into nearly a fraction of what Disney taps into with their, with families over there. They've got a great library. I mean, the thing is about Disney is that they've bought Fox years ago, so they've got a huge library. They don't have to deal too much with licensing. They have ownership of that, so it's not going to cost them that much on their front. It's theirs. Same thing with HBO Max does have to deal with some licensing thing because they have content that's not just Warner Brothers. So I just don't see how they're going to make up $700 million from this approach. But hey, I mean. They're adapting. I don't think most films will go down this route because that is just such a hit, considering how much budget is behind all these films that are expected to be released next year. And I do think that especially because of this news, we're going to hear within a few days that Black Widow will be dropped on Disney Plus pretty soon. So, it doesn't make sense too much from my point of view, but I mean, I get it. They really want to make sure they got all these subscribers, but like, is this going to make you, Harry, is this going to make you sign up for HBO Max to watch Wonder Woman 84?
No, it won't.
Okay.
For a bunch of different reasons, but I do think it's cool that it's available there. If I had HBO Max, I might check it out.
It's only going to be available for like a month. They're going to pull that. It's not
So I think, and then I think that's cool too, because
you could just sign up for a free month and then be done with it.
Yeah, but it sounds really terrible to say, but that movie doesn't interest me enough to even like make an account and like get a free month out of that.
Okay.
I used to have HBO Max, I think, I want to say.
All
but
right.
But in any case, I agree with everything that you're saying. The other thing I want to add onto that for consideration is because it is a franchise property, there's so much more around Wonder Woman than even say Tenet that you can't halt the gears. Like I'm sure Warner and DC want to sell merchandise and this and that. So like by holding it back, they're losing these other revenue streams too.
Right.
So I wonder if that's also.
I mean, if you're thinking of like action figures and stuff like that, right?
Yeah,
Tenet wouldn't have that, but but still, Tenet would have. I mean, after seeing Tenet, I actually don't think it would hit the number that like Inception had made back in 2010. It does kind of require repeat viewings, but would the audience, and you can already tell by the feedback already, it's been pretty mixed. Would they actually go back for a second viewing like they did with Inception? I don't think so. So it might not even gotten in that range had it been released if it was released in 2019.
Yeah.
I'll go to the theater to see Wonder Woman 84, but I already have HBO Max, so they're not getting any more money out of me. They're losing that $20 for. So I'm just again going, well, that's $20 that Warner doesn't have really. So for Wonder Woman 84, but hey, listen, it's just shocking news. I mean, there's only been Mulan. It's been the big budget film that had been released on a streaming platform like this, the biggest so far. So this is up there with that. But it's shocking to see kind of how far we've gone. But hey, I'm excited to watch it on Christmas. Now, let me ask you a question, Harry. It's been a little while since we recorded our last episode, but what have you been watching lately?
So I've actually been more on the TV route in the last couple of weeks since we checked up on what we were watching. I just finished watching The Queen's Gambit, which I think everyone has been watching. There's been a lot of chatter around that. And I enjoyed it, actually. It was a little long in the tooth. I think a lot of the episodes could have been cut quite a bit, but that's probably just an issue of streaming television anyway. They tend to kind of make the episodes and the
You call them filler? I call them filler.
I would say filler. I would say that, there's a fine line between doing letting the narrative and the characters breathe and then just kind of going too far. But I still enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty cool. I like Anya Taylor-Joy. I liked her for the most part in Split, and she did a really good job here. I like the time period. I like that style aesthetically. I like the fashion of the time and cars and the inside of homes, like that whole aesthetic is cool. So I appreciated that. I thought it was pretty good. And it was only 7 episodes, which is good too, because it wasn't like a 12 or longer one. So, in a week or so, I was able to kind of knock it out.
What I'm hearing so far with that is that, yes, there's a lot of chatter about it. People love it, but then I hear now there's the backlash of like, it's like you said, long in the tooth, and that other people are just kind of bewildered, like confused as why it's getting that much of attention. But I'm not, I'm not sure if we spoke about this on the podcast before, but my thing is I love movies mainly because you can get a great movie out of 2.5 hours. But it's a lot harder to achieve that consistently pound for pound with a TV show because the filler, because, it'll be a bumpy ride for the most part that I've seen. There have been exceptions though, like Breaking Bad. I've said that the last season of Breaking Bad, it's almost like every episode was a great movie. So it's always been a big risk and just a lot of time that, it takes out for me. But you're going down that route. So that's just the first show that you've watched. What's the next show that you watch?
So it's interesting that you said each episode is like a movie, because I also have been really enjoying The Crown. And just recently, the new season came out. And there are some beautiful episodes. The cinematography is really good. Just the whole tone of certain episodes. I've been impressed with it in certain cases, and the performances are really good. So, I've been slowly making my way through that along with my wife. And again, like it's quite good.
See, I've heard the exact same thing as the previous show you said. Huh?
I said, I heard you scoff a little bit, so I want to...
Well, I did because like I just heard, maybe it's just the timing and where these and how these shows are hitting the platforms, but it's just like I've heard the same thing. Everyone's like, The Crown's been on. It's been one of the rare shows where it's been on the longest on Netflix. I think it's 4 or 5 seasons.
This is the 4th season. So
and not many shows on Netflix make it this far.
What
right?
about Orange is the New Black? I think
right. That's one of the first.
But you're right.
And I'm sure House of Cards. But the thing is, it's very rare that happens. But a lot of people, what I've heard is that a lot of couples, like the girlfriend or the wife in the situation wants to watch it, and the husband or the boyfriend kind of has to go along with it, and the feedback is just like, you can skip a lot. Not much goes on.
I have to cut you off there. I think that's a little. I'm not going to say it's offensive. I don't think that's it at all, because I think a lot of guys will enjoy the history portion of it because it's very interesting. So I'm just I don't know if I want to go down that route. That's how people are watching it, because I disagree. I heard about it and I said, well, that's kind of interesting. I liked because it starts off like after World War II kind of, or around that era. So it just interests me that way. And It has like a lot of really great actors and actresses in it. I mean, I think
Gillian Anderson's in it, right? And
I'm sorry?
Gillian Anderson from The X-Files?
Yeah, she's Margaret Thatcher in this season. She's doing a fantastic job. John Lithgow as Winston Churchill. I was all about that in the first couple of seasons. He was tremendous. He was amazing in that role. So, I have to say, I don't want to sell it short as it's like a chick flick kind of thing where you're forced to watch it because your girlfriend or wife wants to. I think it definitely stands on its own.
Right, and Olivia Colman is the main. She's Academy Award winning actress.
Right, she plays the Queen starting from season 3.
Right. So, well, you're enjoying it. Well, that's good to hear. I mean, again, I'm only hearing this from others, having not watched a single episode. Luckily, I've canceled my Netflix a long time ago.
Well, luckily. Was it luck?
Well, the thing is, mostly shows, right? And the movies that they had on at the time, they weren't that good. I mean, it was like that Cloverfield movie, and they dumped a lot of stuff. Right. Oh, no, I think the last one I did watch was the Michael Bay movie with Ryan Gosling. And once he runs, not Ryan Gosling, sorry, Ryan Reynolds, where Ryan Reynolds started, like, even in the movie, like ordering an aviation gin, and I was just like, oh my God, that's it. I'm out of this movie. This is ridiculous. And anyway, that's another topic. But yeah, done with Netflix. But yeah, that's me. So I handle all the movies. I've seen a lot of movies lately. But so is there any other shows that? Well, that's it. Those are the only shows.
Yeah,
I'm thinking you'd have more, man.
Really. But all right. I'm curious to know what you've been watching.
All right. Well, in one of our earlier episodes that people will come across soon, you looked at the trailer for the movie Unhinged with Russell Crowe. Now, I won't spoil what your reaction was at the time. That was like in July of 2020 when that occurred, and it was like, or when we saw it, I guess. And then, I thought it looked like, a good time. I haven't seen Russell Crowe in a movie in a long time. He's been, I think, since The Nice Guys was the last movie I saw him in, and he's changed quite a bit since. But I've recently watched it, and it had dropped on streaming on iTunes, and then I was surprised at how much I was really enjoying it for the first 20 minutes, and then it went downhill pretty quickly. It was written by the guy who wrote Disturbia with Shia LaBeouf. That was a fun, it was basically, it took the Rear Window premise and stole it, and then just said, hey, let's make this for kids, or and have Shia LaBeouf play it when he was younger. And then that writer just basically took Falling Down, the screenplay in that, and then they just threw Russell Crowe in it. And Russell Crowe is great. That's the thing. I think when you see him, he is really good. There's an opening sequence with him in the car where he's just fantastic. It's just, reminds you, I miss him so much. I want him to be more prevalent. I want him to be in more movies lately. I know he was in a show fairly recently. I forgot the name of it. But he was great. And the first few scenes with him, he has this immense presence, and just his acting was just, boom, that worked for me. Everything else in the movie, not so much. The screenplay, there isn't too much there, and where it goes is just like, okay, we're going down. I'm not going to spoil much here, but it's just like, all right, we're going to go down these particular routes. I was kind of shocked to some degree in how far they took things, but instead of sympathizing with the character to some degree, like they do in Falling Down, like you're not necessarily on Michael Douglas's side in Falling Down 100% of the way. You're off. You get off that train at some point. This one, you get off early, very early. But it's hard to really kind of see. Yeah, it's just they almost turn him into like he's not a three-dimensional character. Let me put it that way. And there's certain things I will say, minor spoilers, that okay, let me just say this really briefly. The movie opens basically his wife ended things with him. He tosses his ring in the back of his car. Other things kind of happen on that front. But then he takes that out on others, and he takes that out on another driver. And he projects his experience in his life, what he's happened lately, onto someone else that had a similar experience. And it just seemed very forced. So that just, I get it. Like some people will project their stuff, what they've gone through, onto other people in their life, and it plays sides or whatever it would be. But it was just a little bit too much, and I didn't buy it. But that was kind of it for Unhinged. But I'd say if you're gonna watch it, hey, go for Russell Crowe. But everything else, just go in with low expectations. Well, the next movie I checked out was a movie called Possessor Uncut. Have you heard of this movie, Harry?
Yes, I definitely heard of it. Yes,
it's a Cronenberg. Well, not David Cronenberg, but his son has made a film. I haven't watched too many David Cronenberg films, but I think the last one I saw, I loved Eastern Promises and History of Violence with Viggo Mortensen. You haven't seen any of those, I believe, right?
No, but I always recommend Videodrome to you. So.
And I never watch it. It's just hard to get access to. So, how will I watch this movie, Harry? No, you keep telling me I should watch it, and I have to.
I think you could. Yeah, you're gonna have to order it on DVD. I think they made a Criterion version of it.
Son of a bitch.
I could be wrong.
All right. Anyway.
They did release it with the Criterion edition. I remember way back in the day when I was working at Rite Aid, one of the customers gave me a copy of it. So that's how I got my copy.
Yeah, I had to have.
You could go work at CVS, and hopefully one of the customers will come and bring it to you.
I think that's what it comes down to. I can't watch this thing till someone else delivers it to me somehow. That's the only way I can watch this film. We got to keep with that trend.
It is a fine film. You should definitely watch it. But
I just keep seeing the image. That character going in the TV. Is that right?
Well, yeah. There's a lot of great images there. So take your pick. But I'm sorry, you were talking about Possessor.
Right. Well, the Possessor, I'm going to be very brief with, is that it's basically like you've seen Inception, where a character wants to get into someone's mind to control their dreams. Well, this is a movie where a character goes into someone's mind to basically assassinate someone else. Mm-hmm. That's the little premise of the story.
Right.
That idea is very interesting. I won't go into too much detail, but I'll say that I did not know what to expect within this movie. There's a lot of nudity that I didn't expect to some degree.
Okay.
Like,
Unexpected news.
and to challenge me to the point where I was seeing a lot of movies where I go, especially in the 90s and the 80s, is the nudity really justified? Are we just flashing it around? And in this movie, I asked that question, and I go, they kind of justified in some of the, a lot of these scenes. So overall, a very confident narrative. Brandon Cronenberg, who directed it and wrote it as well. Some very weird, unsettling imagery.
I just want to put this out there. I think for every episode when we discuss a movie, if there's nudity in it, we should just discuss if it was justifiable or not.
You think so?
If it was justified nudity, it could be like one part of the episode. Like,
I feel like that could have been the alternate title to our podcast.
Yeah, well,
Justified nudity, everybody. Was Harvey Keitel in Bad Lieutenant? Was that necessary?
I think that's completely
The
justified.
uncut and then there are different versions. Like this one's uncut. I didn't see the cut version. Maybe there's no nudity in that. I don't know. But I'll say this is that it stars Andrea Riseborough, Christopher Abbott, Jennifer Jason Leigh, and Sean Bean. Sean Bean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So I just want to make sure he's great. So yeah, I was just all the way from the very beginning to the end. I think it was just incredibly confident storytelling. I think you especially would love it. If I had to bet on it, I would say that if you watched it, you would think it's the best film of this year. Again, there's not much to compete against, but I think that you would really connect with this film. A lot of the things that we discuss on this podcast, and I'll leave that up to your imagination right now, what that could be. But, I think it hits a lot of the chords, a lot of the things that you look for in a movie. I don't want to hype it too much because we also, as we discussed, if you hype things up too much, you're going to be underwhelmed. But I really think this film will connect with you. It is ultra violent as well.
Right.
But overall, from beginning to end, I was shocked. There went places I didn't expect it to go. And I'd highly recommend it. So I'll leave you with that. So definitely check out Possessor, Harry. And hopefully we'll talk about it on this show. I don't know how the hell we'll bounce to it. But hopefully we'll hear back from you about that. Okay. Well, today, now that we've already discussed what's been going on in November 2020, let's take you back to the time of June 2020. You wanted to get out of June 2020.
Yeah, I don't want to revisit that month.
You don't want to revisit. No, but
go.
listen, these are going to be things that you're going to, of June 2020, we're picking out the apples. And what are those apples? Well, it's just mainly one, The Rock. And a trailer to Tenet. So let's begin. Here you go. Here's Harry's reaction to the trailer to Tenet. So Harry, you've just watched the final, I think it's the final or the second trailer to Tenet. So what are your initial thoughts after your first viewing? What's your reaction?
Nah.
Okay.
I'm not trying to be entertaining or flippant, but it just doesn't seem interesting.
Okay.
And so here's my more detailed take. Number one, that concept isn't particularly interesting.
Inversion?
And honestly, like it's been done in like non-cinema media, like video games and like maybe less mainstream forms of entertainment. So for me, like I'm just not interested in it. Like it's not unique.
Okay.
And since I knew we were going to talk about Nolan a bit today, I was thinking kind of about him. And I think he's very talented. I think he's smart. I think he can be creative. But he also makes you think that, so there's a quote, I think it's Stephen King. He said when he first started writing, he was looking at what was out there. And he said, like, I only need to be slightly better than this. And, at the time, whatever he was looking at wasn't that good or whatever. But that makes me think of, like, Nolan. And I'm not accusing him of directly taking that approach. But he only needs to be slightly more creative and slightly better than what else is going on in mainstream Hollywood, which isn't that much. It's not that great. So, he only has to go like halfway forward to kind of get attention and get accolades and get people to kind of perk up their ears. So,
but you're talking about on the receiving end for the audiences. I mean, we're so used to, the climate in terms of the movies that are out there. I don't know where you'd say that bar is at this point in time, but you're right.
It's pretty low already. I mean, it's pretty low, and it's been consistently low for a while. I mean, let's even take Memento, right?
Right.
Like, well, what other movies out there were really like,
And he's
I
kind
don't
of
want to
tested
say,
this out with Memento. I mean, the first shot of that movie is the bullet, everything going in reverse. So he's kind of already done this a little bit to some degree. He's hinted at this before.
right. And I can see that Memento was kind of a first draft. Like, I like the movie. I thought it was good. I mean, it's gimmicky. Like many of his movies are gimmicky, and that's cool. But I think we just need to we need to recognize that like, okay, like we're going to see his gimmick and we're going to see how it plays out. I am not as comfortable in saying that these movies are particularly brilliant or, amazing beyond the fact that he's pulling off a magic trick. And like, that's really cool. But like, you can only see a magic trick once or twice, and then you're not interested in seeing it anymore. Like, how many times can you see Memento? Like I joked with you, the second time you see Memento, it's a comedy.
Huh.
So, I just feel like they're cool. They're great the first time, and then you don't revisit them because whatever.
See, I kind of disagree with you. I mean, I like your take on if you watch Memento a second time that it's a comedy. See, I find I'm completely the opposite. I think that it's more tragic when you watch it a second time, especially since you know where it's headed. But then it's like, especially at the beginning of the movie, you think, well, the beginning is the end, so it's just like, what's next for him? He's knocked off Teddy. I mean, spoiler for Memento, but like, this is not going to end. This is going to be very bleak. His future does not look good. It's going to be, it's going to be horrible. You don't want to see that movie.
Oh, sure, but you know what? Like when you're making a movie and the main thrust of your movie is, again, I'll say, is a gimmick.
Yeah. Well,
there's not a lot of like, yeah, you can start talking about like all of these other things, but it's clear that, the priority of Nolan is to pull off this gimmick.
That's fair enough, because it's like, well, you've seen, I think, all of his movies except, well, following, which is first feature, Dunkirk and Interstellar. So,
I didn't see it, and I want to see it. Like, again, I've got nothing against the guy. I just feel like people, smother him too much with compliments.
Right, but to your point, all of his movies, most of his movies, I think even Batman Begins, but they all play with the nonlinear narrative of just at some point in time. Actually, not even Dark Knight. I mean, he has a little twist there. It doesn't really mess with time. He just messes with the narrative a bit. But yes, a lot of that is the nonlinear storytelling that he always does mess with. He likes to play with that. Now, can you say, okay, well, you've done that once, you've done that twice, but now you just kind of see it as a gimmick, and then you go, okay, it might have been appropriate with Memento considering the story it's trying to tell. But in other movies, it's just not fitting. Like, again, you didn't see Interstellar, but The Prestige, it's tough.
The Prestige.
It's probably his best film.
I would probably agree with you.
I'm sorry. Dunkirk is definitely his best film, but Prestige is definitely the second, at least in my opinion. But I'm trying to think if Prestige didn't mess with the nonlinear storytelling. I think
it had aspects of that. It works because obviously the theme of the movie is about magic and magic tricks.
Right.
So it works better there. Memento, I think, is pretty clever overall. Again, it is based in pulling off one trick. As you know, I didn't like Inception. This movie doesn't appeal to me. When you start to combine like science fiction and tricks, then it's like, okay, well, you can do anything then, right? Like, you're only limited by your imagination. And okay, look, beyond the inversion gimmick, there's nothing in that trailer that differentiates itself from any other trailer that I've seen in like the last 5 years. It's very similar. Like, if I wasn't paying attention, like, it could look like a Mission Impossible movie. It could look like the next Will Smith movie. It could be James Bond. It could be like, whatever. Oh Christ, not Jack Reacher. Who's the other guy? Matt Damon. It could be like a Bourne movie. Like, yeah, like all of these things. Like they really lack any kind of identity visually. Like, it's just, there's no style to it.
Okay. All right. Well, it's interesting to hear what you thought of it. Now, one other thing I just want to shift in before we dive into our main movie today is, because we did hear this past weekend that there's been a lot of chatter from the Han Solo fans out there that they wanted to make a Solo 2. After seeing Solo, I was a bit disappointed, but you actually were more favorable about the film. So what do you think of, is there, in your opinion, even though it probably won't get financed, or maybe if Disney Plus takes it up as a TV show or something, do you think that with what they started with in that Ron Howard directed solo movie, that there's more room. This is a world you want to know more of. Do you feel like you would be there for a Solo 2?
I personally wouldn't. I'm really no longer interested in Star Wars, so I'm really not on board. I don't really care what they do, but I wouldn't begrudge Star Wars fans from having like another solo movie. If I was still into Star Wars, like absolutely, I'd love to see another adventure of Han Solo on the big screen. But at this point now, like I would not want to see it.
Okay. Well, after I saw it the first time, I fell asleep in the movie. I did watch it again since I think I told you I like it a little bit more, but it still just seems like it's really a film that's not necessary to have been made. But I mildly enjoyed it, but that's not even saying much. So obviously on my end, I'd probably be like, I mean, I liked Woody Harrelson in it. I like some of the other side characters. I wasn't a huge fan of the performance by the actor who played Han Solo. But for me, hey, I would watch it. I don't know if I'd sign up for Disney Plus to watch it, but if it were in theaters, I might give it a look if it's just 2 hours.
Well,
But anyway.
I like what you said about like it's a movie that didn't need to be made, and yeah, I think that's really true. But then I also just feel like it's just Star Wars content,
Right.
And
how much more can you push out to us? Like
you could push out a ton of content, but
there are
it's
250 writers at least that couldn't wait to just write some fan fiction and have it be a movie or TV show. I mean, it's endless content right there. Don't you feel that you would rather watch content that was at least the story was by George Lucas, or does it matter a lot to you in terms of who's writing this?
It doesn't matter as long as it's well done, which sounds like a cop out, but like there are people who would say, no, I want George Lucas's content. I want it as close to his intentions as possible. And I get that. If I was just like a Star Wars fan, I would be happy to have more content, right? Because then you get to see things on screen. You can, if you read the books or if you're following other forms of the media, then you're seeing it fleshed out visually and you're seeing it there in a movie, which would be really cool. And again, you get pieces of the story, maybe questions answered that you're like, oh, how did he get the dice? Or like, how did this happen? So yeah, like there's value to it. I think, I'm not going to trash it. Like it's no longer my cup of tea, but again, you and I would not necessarily debate the merits of that film the same way that we would talk about another movie. It's more about like, does it deliver, does it scratch the Star Wars itch? Like yes or no. And I think that's a separate conversation.
Right. And for me, my entry point within Star Wars since when I was a kid was, again, so I wasn't very little, but like was the lightsabers and Han Solo's character, like that charisma. I loved that. Not really totally embracing this world, but then eventually having to, and just that charisma that he has is what brought me into liking the original trilogy. And it wasn't there in the prequels, and of course he was only there for a little bit in The Force Awakens, but especially when that charisma wasn't there in this Ron Howard Solo, I was just like, okay, well, Harrison Ford's gone. He's never playing this character again. So I feel like for me, I'm not embracing this world as much, so I probably wouldn't be on board. I mean, hey, neither of us have watched The Mandalorian, so that pretty much says a lot in terms of where we stand as Star Wars fans at this
right.
point. Like you mentioned, you're kind of where you are at this point.
Yeah, and it's totally fine to kind of walk away and realize that it's moved past us. Like, it's passed us by and it's not for us anymore. And I've certainly made peace with that.
Yeah. Okay, girl. Well, what it is for us today is another Jerry Bruckheimer film. A film that, I have a different experience from you. I've watched it kind of when it was around the time it was released, and then you've just watched this movie within the past month, I believe. So we're going to be talking today about The Rock. Came out June 6, 1996. It was, we just reviewed Con Air. And so Con Air came out a year after this movie. But this was the movie. The Rock is Nicolas Cage's first movie that was released after he just won an Oscar for Leaving Las Vegas. And then you have Connery. You know, he's at the forefront of this movie. It's bringing him back. And I didn't know this. I actually didn't know this until years ago, where The Rock was basically written as basically what happened with James Bond,
right?
Where that character have gone, and that's very interesting. I didn't go into the movie when I first watched it with that in mind. But I went into this movie expecting I was excited to watch from the trailers, an exciting 2-hour roller coaster of a movie, something in the similar vein of like the 90s movies of the time, like a Speed or, I'm trying to think, or Bad Boys, which is what Bruckheimer produced beforehand. And going in with those expectations when I first saw it, and then you got Ed Harris in the mix as a villain. What do you thought of? And I got to say, on my end, I was a bit disappointed after I first saw it because I had such high expectations. But I came out of the movie, and I will go into this later on, feeling like I didn't see the movie. I thought, wow, this was a rush. But did I watch The Rock? And I can go into more detail about that in a little bit. So I was a little bit mixed on my first viewing, but after a few other viewings since, I've liked it more and more. But what was your initial reaction right after you just saw the movie under a month ago?
So before I get into that, I have to say, yes, I've only this movie is now 20 years old, more than that?
25. It's almost 25.
And I've only seen it, in the last month, and not for lack of trying, because as you know, I wanted to see that movie in theaters when it came out. And I remember it was like the week that it came out, I went with one of our other friends from grade school, went to the theater, tried to buy tickets. They wouldn't sell it to us because R-rated movie, we were not of age yet. But there was like this kind of creepy guy who overheard the refusal, and he approached us and said, well, I could buy you tickets. We'll go in together, blah, blah, blah. And I just, got that whole stranger danger feeling, and so we turned him down. But, whenever I think of The Rock, I just think about, that might have been the time I, could have gotten molested in a movie theater. Who knows?
Yeah, that's a very uncomfortable situation to kind of be in there, a close call, because you never know where that could have gone. But
didn't like it.
But didn't you had a bit of anticipation before this event had occurred? So after that, the ultimate event, you just had no interest in going back to there. Were you just tethering the movie to that experience, and that was just something you didn't want to go back to for quite some time?
No, I just think it would just never came up again. Like at that point, I had put it out of my dumb mind, and then right. I was always aware of the movie, but let's face it, there were always better movies to see. But
I don't know about the time, because I think at that time you told me you saw The Island of Dr. Moreau, and I think you've gotten bit really hard by that movie, which I still haven't seen. I think I did watch the documentary of that movie though, which was fascinating, but still, after your review of that movie, I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna waste 2 hours, even watching two actors I love, Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando in one movie. And I still have to say, again, I haven't seen it, but even with those two on screen, that didn't engage you with that movie?
That movie was terrible. I'm not going to waste time talking about it
sure.
now. We could maybe do it on a future episode, but
right. But your theatrical experience that time was shifted more towards the Island of Dr. Moreau as opposed to The Rock.
Well, I thought that was like PG-13, so able to get into that.
There you go. So you don't have to worry about that. To leap over. But yeah, I think that this movie, when it came out, it was and we tackled a little bit of this in the Con Air episode, is that, the action genre had been kind of changing around that time. Because again, you did have 2 years prior to that, you had speed movies. You're getting still those I don't want to say those movies that were derivative, I should say, of Die Hard, which was you had, and I think all the quotes on the movies, if you see like the DVDs and such like that, they still might say like review. The high points is that you get these in quotes, you'll see like Under Siege, Die Hard on a battleship, or like Executive Decision, Die Hard on an airplane, and every movie was Die Hard of a something or other. But then I think that was kind of like running out of steam. So then we got Bad Boys, which came out the year before, and that kind of shifted things a bit. We're just like, no, we're putting our own specific stamp on it. These are some real great comedians, I should say, playing these parts. They're not the Stallone or Schwarzenegger types as we discussed. They're just kind of more like the everyday kind of man kind of a thing. And they've done that here again with The Rock, casting Nicolas Cage as the main character. You would not think that this guy's going to be at the gym 5 days a week working out, nor Sean Connery or Ed Harris. So I was excited to see it, and just to kind of give you a little brief synopsis before we dive in. And IMDb states this movie. The synopsis is: a mild-mannered chemist and an ex-con must lead the counterstrike when a rogue group of military men, led by renegade general, threatens a nerve gas attack from Alcatraz against San Francisco. So there you go. You're hit with that. Like, this is the plot. Ready to go. Once we begin the movie, Harry, what's your initial take on The Rock?
I liked it. I liked it, and I have a lot of reasons why I did like it and why I thought it succeeded.
Okay.
I don't really want... It's very tempting to compare it to Con Air, especially because we spent a lot of time last week talking about it. But I think if we look at the three main characters, the ones that you mentioned, they all work really well. They all bring something different to the table. So you've got the Nicolas Cage character, who is the
Stanley Goodspeed,
who's the reluctant action hero. He's obviously a brain. He's there because he's a chemist. He's there to help diffuse, those bioweapons and everything. You've got Sean Connery, who's the ex-con, who has an edge to him, who's the badass. And then you have Ed Harris, who plays that role really well of being kind of the spurned, ex-military guy who's doing what he's doing because he wants to take care of all of those soldiers under his command that can tell by the wayside that kind of got, swept under the rug. That he has that ideology makes him a really great antagonist.
Right.
Because in these movies, you're always teetering on the ridiculous. And this being a Michael Bay film, there's a lot of that, but yet he grounds it. He's not a cartoon villain. He's not like he's not a two-dimensional kind of character, because he's got this ideology. You did say he's conflicted. We see that in the movie, and I appreciated that. I felt like this movie, as dumb as a lot of scenes were, I felt like it didn't necessarily take the audience for granted, or it didn't necessarily try to pull something off on them. Like, I felt like it respected the audience a bit. And certainly, I'm going against what I just said 2 minutes ago, whereas Con Air did. So this movie, I felt like the setup was great. It was, everything felt grounded. Ed Harris's motivation, can totally buy it. Stanley Goodspeed, Nicolas Cage, this guy, he's kind of reluctantly being pulled into the family life. Like, there's all of these things here as to why he might want to do things, as to why he might not want to. And then with Sean Connery, again, they put him in this situation. He couldn't really care less, but he got drug along, and finally, he made the right decision and stuck with.
But the stakes are there, and they set that up from the very beginning, right within the introduction of Nicolas Cage's character. You're getting introduced to him within the workplace, and then they're immediately kind of blindsided by this Nervex poison gas that they've got to disarm within this weapon. And then, so you get the fact that there are some heavy stakes here, and you can see what this can do to someone's. They show you an example of what it can do to a suit, and I believe they had some insects in a bottle where you can see what it does to them, and you go, oh man, this is the setup. So these are the heavy stakes within this movie, and we're most likely going to see that pay off later on. The Ed Harris character, you see he's conflicted, and you can see that, okay, this isn't going to be the real evil villain. This isn't a Hannibal Lecter type or anything like that. So they bring in this Nervex poison gas to add that additional weight to the movie. So you got a great performance by Ed Harris on one end, and then you also have on that side as well this poison gas that can really do a lot of damage. So I think that that's a great setup. As soon as you're being introduced to all these characters, they're spending, I think, the first 30 to 45 minutes on establishing Ed Harris's character, Sean Connery's character, as well as Nicolas Cage's, as well as the stakes. So I think that that's why this movie, right from the very beginning, you're getting an idea, okay, what is this movie aiming for? What is it looking to achieve? And so I guess, where do you think, from your perspective, once everything kicks in, after you get this initial setup and the action kicks in, how are you feeling about the movie? I mean, you've mentioned a few scenes that were, as you said, stupid. Are there any you want to point out? Anything that didn't work for you?
I want to start. I do want to make sure to mention that the movie is very formulaic, but I'm not
Yeah.
saying that as a criticism. I'm actually saying that as a compliment because I think done right, a formula can be very successful. So, you start the movie, you mentioned, you see the effects of the nerve gas, you see good speed doing well under pressure, you see how
Yeah.
he approaches these problems. That comes back later. A lot of these elements come back later in the movie. So,
Yeah.
there's not
The
a lot of
need.
wasted time. There's not a lot of throwaway stuff. Like,
Right.
Michael Bay uses every piece of the buffalo. Like when he's skinning up this movie, he puts something in there and then there's a callback to it. And
Right.
again, you've seen that a million times, but this isn't a movie that's necessarily there to challenge you. It's there to entertain.
But I think it's how it's handled that actually it kind of threw me off a little bit when I watched it the first time. And I think a lot of that is due to, at least on my end, and I don't know how you feel about it. And actually, I want to talk to you about it in terms of, did you feel that the direction, Michael Bay as a director, because I always felt when I first saw it the first time, it threw me out of it just how the camera's always moving. And it almost felt like I wasn't even because I was so used to other movies at the time, even the action movies, the camera's staying still when you're developing the characters and all that. But the movie it was always swooping in, and especially when we get to the action scenes, it's always doing that where you actually lose an idea in terms of geography and where the characters are. Where it took me out of it, and I felt like it almost felt like I was a little bit disoriented the first time I watched it. It did seem kind of like a music video nonstop, at least for me. But that's kind of Michael Bay's style, and he really leaned into that ever since. But what was your take? Did the directing kind of take you out of the movie more? Were you not bothered by it? Or what's your take on Michael Bay? This is your first Michael Bay movie that you've watched.
This is my first Michael Bay movie. There is one scene that you mentioned. Now that you mentioned getting disoriented, it was like when they were in those like mine carts or something.
Right. It's like Indiana
I found that
Jones.
scene to be disorienting. Beyond that, I thought it worked well. I actually, it's a movie where a guy gets blown away by a rocket, which is fantastic. I mean, I think as much as I'm not a huge fan of over-the-top action, I think in the right places, it's really great.
Right.
And although this movie has that scene, it was surprisingly restrained. I mean, you had a car chase. It wasn't that ridiculous. Everything seemed
Well, we did have
done.
those with their characters playing basketball, holding a basketball in wheelchairs and such. So you got those almost comedic, obstacles in the way of this chase that you're like, oh gosh, it's like you're the audience members seeing all these. You got the old granny on a cane. Actually, that is in this movie. Like you have all these tropes.
It's all dumb.
Wasn't that
it's
laughable
all
to you?
It's stupid, but like I mean, what do you expect? It's like a '90s action movie. Like they were shoehorning the stupidest jokes and the stupidest gags into all those movies. Speed had it. Like, it was just par for the course.
Right. Okay, but again, but even when you saw that, you just kind of went. It didn't take you out of the movie. You're just like, all right, I'm rolling with it. This is kind
And
of
then
like,
you're talking about how the characters kind of learn to accept each other, and I felt that was very organic for the most part. I felt like they both kind of begrudgingly accepted their roles, and it was believable. And again, that was something that I appreciated because it wasn't done out of convenience. It wasn't done because it's like, well, the movie's almost over. We got to get these people together and working together and all of that. Like it did happen gradually enough that it was not glaring when they finally became friends.
as things kind of progress, there is that tension. Like Connor didn't want to be there. At some point, he's like, this is all on you. I'm going to go see my daughter. And that's another thing I think for me that didn't work as much. Maybe it was because I was so used to watching a lot of other action movies at the time where there's the setup, the payoffs, but when you introduce a character, in this case, Sean Connery's daughter, where a little at the beginning of that, at the end of that chase sequence on San Francisco, he had to go meet and have a conversation with his daughter. But that's the one and only scene where she's in the movie, I'm pretty sure, because you've gotten the other characters like Goodspeed's now fiance, where you're on board. They make the she's there. I think toward the end of the movie as well, so you get that. But Connery just speaks about his daughter moving forward, and there's no kind of ending to that. I'm not sure if it's necessary. Maybe it doesn't have to be. But there are little things like that that at least kind of go, okay, this is Connery. He has his motivation. He just wants to get back to his daughter, be done with this mission, and he knows that he's going to be screwed over, at some point there too. So there's that element.
I
But
really liked the procedure of how the movie kind of continued to go from point A to point B, because it was very like, okay, first they have to get in, or even better, like first they need Sean Connery, then they need to get into into Alcatraz, then they need to track the bombs, then they need to defuse them. So it's those incremental steps that keep you going for the movie, and that I think makes the movie that much more captivating. Um, Again, I'm kind of talking about this movie as if it's some sort of masterpiece, and it's not. I enjoyed it, but
well, there's that scene like you as you're kind of describing it, when they have to break into Alcatraz. There's where Connery has to get the timing right. Like he memorized things so well in terms of how he was going to break out of it, and now he's kind of reverse engineering that to some degree, and he kind of knows a lot of these things because he studied it for so long while he was there. And I think I remember because we all watched this with our friends and such like that, and you even called out like, how does he remember this stuff? And I'm like, no, to his point, I'm like, he had to memorize this back then. It's like, it's almost like reflect. Of course, I totally believe that. Okay, he would get the timing right. This is kind of it. It's a little bit absurd within the context of the movie, and you see that within Nicolas Cage's reaction. So that's all told there. So I think all that stuff, you're right. Those things.
well, and it also has a very video game kind of feel to it, and there's value to that because it's about accomplishing all of these little goals that get you to the big goal, and that's why I think the movie works more for me than say Con Air, because Con Air is just all like nothing ever really adds up in my opinion. Everything kind of just comes together by happenstance towards the end. Whereas with The Rock, it's like they are definitely making their way. They're achieving things that are helping them get closer to their ultimate end goal, which obviously as a viewer, you stay along with it because you're seeing that progress.
right.
And you're looking back and saying like, they've accomplished this much already, or they've gone this far. So you want them to keep going.
Right. And, everything's constantly building. And it's funny you mentioned it. I was going to say, I could totally imagine this being a video game, but obviously it hadn't been at all. I don't think on any platform. But would you see that as being a good video game? Could you imagine something like that? Would you be on board?
It's very similar to like Metal Gear Solid. Like there's an infiltration, like then you've got to, identify the location of certain things and deal with them. So yeah, I mean, it's been done, certainly you could make that game today. I don't think it would work as a Super Nintendo game, but it would work as like a PlayStation game.
The action isn't incredibly over the top. Like again, this isn't. If you did have a Schwarzenegger type, if that was the main character in this movie, it would get incredibly absurd. And it's already absurd to some degree here, but you go, okay, I'm really expending my levels of disbelief here for saying that Nicolas Cage, his character, with what they've set up, that he can make it through this, and even Connery's character, but it's not so over the top. So with there is this nice balance there as the everything's kind of going along, and I think I'm on board.
They smartly played to the strengths of the actors and the characters.
Yes.
You had mentioned Arnold Schwarzenegger, and if he was in there, it would be crazy, but then Arnold that would
the performance
be fine,
you wouldn't have the performance. He wouldn't be bringing his A game because
he may not have, but let's just say like the platonic Arnold Schwarzenegger who's giving you his best Arnie, it would be a different movie. It would be way more over the top, and it would still work because those elements would come together, and it would be, of course, a very different experience. Whereas The Rock is pretty somewhat conservative in the action. I mean, it's still satisfying action from my point of view, but it all fit together in this universe of The Rock. Like None of the characters behaved in a way that was unbelievable. By the time Nicolas Cage is shooting rockets at people and like, allowing himself to get infected and then curing himself, like that's believable. Like he's gotten to that point. He graduated to that point as a character, just as Sean Connery kind of became a bit more compassionate, having, started working with this guy and understanding the stakes and being part of it. So that organic development worked for me.
Right, and it is. I can't imagine Schwarzenegger and Connery in this movie. He'd be like, like, getting upset about, Ed Harris's character, Goodspeed, to be like, hey, Hamo, come over here. I need the rockets. Like, you can't kind of, like, that would totally shift the tone of this movie. And again, I think it's just a testament to the work that they've done.
And the thing that I just kind of thought of now, because, just talking about what the movie does,
Right.
it uses, we were talking, 30 minutes ago about the trailer to the Tenet.
Yeah.
There's nothing striking about that.
Hmm.
But those glowing kind of like anal beads that have like the toxin in them, those like
Right.
iridescent, like green, that's visually striking.
Right.
Anybody could have just come up with some boring kind of bomb with like a digital clock on it.
Right.
Like
It's just
they
calm.
made that where there's something that you actually have to handle. You have to be very careful with it. They're very unwieldy. It's like this long string. It's like
Right.
3 feet long. He's got to pull them out and cradle
A bunch
them.
of caviar.
Right, exactly. And I like that too. It was a smart decision to do that.
And you got the stakes right there. You know what happens if one of those things fall, they crush. You're like, oh, and that actually does play out at the end of the movie to our main character, to Nicolas Cage's character, and where he has to use that needle. He has to inject himself with like he at the very beginning of the movie didn't want to get injected. He's like, get that thing away from me. Now he's got to go ahead and do it. So the stakes are there, and the main character is confronted with it. But you, like you said, you take it as it's all real, and they're not within the action. Even though you mentioned Nicolas Cage launching rockets at people, as we describe it, you can, if you didn't see the movie, you think, oh my gosh, this sounds. How many special effects are in this movie? And I think they rely more on practical effects, where it does keep everything as grounded as possible. Where today, if it were released, it probably would have that that Marvel budget behind it, throw some special effects in it, and take you out of the movie. Where I think a lot of things, this budget wasn't even that huge. I think at the time it only cost $75 million to make, which is good. They didn't throw too many special effects in there, grounded everything, and you had the performances anchoring everything.
Right.
Yeah, so I was on board. Did you start getting worn out toward the third act, though? Did you start feeling like, okay, we're going to go through, Connery's gone, but he'll come back. Did you feel any of that, or were you still...
No, not so much, actually. I remember just kind of watching it and not being taken out of it. Like, I didn't feel like I was watching myself watching it, which is what I felt like when we were watching Con Air. I felt like Con Air, I was just literally kind of like antsy and just like, well, how long is this movie going to keep going? And whereas with this, I was actually watching it. Like it entertained me. It did what it was supposed to do.
Wait a minute. You just introduced this whole idea of you watching yourself watching a movie, which is kind of fascinating now that I think about it. Because I don't think I've ever watched a movie thinking that, but now I'm starting to. Now I feel like I will throw that in there. Where, tell me about that. How many movies do you feel like, in addition to Con Air, is that a lot of movies where you feel like you'll see yourself watching the movie and just kind of comment? Yeah, tell me about that.
There are movies where you just start to be like, I would rather be doing something else.
Right.
And
Okay.
I'm kind of wasting my time. And then you're just so much more, you're paying more attention to your own self and your own thoughts, and you're not watching the movie anymore. You're just like, you're running the clock out.
Right.
And, The Rock was not one of those movies simply because, again, was it very intellectually stimulating? Was it challenging me? No. But at the same time, it wasn't boring. It wasn't overwrought. It had the perfect kind of, length, all of that. It wasn't arduous to have to watch.
Right. See, the only thing I can compare myself to, like what the experience you just described, is that if I'm watching an action movie where you can kind of see, it depends on where, I don't know how soon in a movie that can happen for you, where you feel like you're watching yourself watch the movie. But, when you get to the point, I totally see, where it's just like, oh, you see all the beats, where this is going. You could pretty much describe the ending of the movie before it actually plays out. In that case, that would be incredibly, obviously very boring. There's some movies that are just like, you don't care what happens. If you're not invested as much in the characters, you're like, well, why should I go along with them on this journey? I'm going to shut the movie off. Or forward through it. I didn't know how you would, take in this movie. I actually would have bet that you wouldn't like this movie, mostly because of the action, kind of almost being over the top, even for its time. that could have been the reason to take you out of the movie. That was it. So I was really surprised when you said that, oh, you enjoyed it. Because, I mean, if you watched it again, maybe you'd be thinking something different. Again, for me, the first time I watched it, I know I gave this example before to you off mic, is that I remember the excitement I had of watching that third Batman movie. This great excitement of the movies that came before it, seeing the trailer for Batman Forever, then going to see it, and it was such a lightweight movie that I came out of the movie going, wait, did I watch a Batman movie? There weren't really any real stakes to the movie where I felt like I didn't watch it. Like I spent the 2 hours, but I got really no value out of it. It was forgettable instantly after you watched the movie. And yeah, I felt like do I have to watch it again? Did I fall asleep? When I watched this movie the first time, I did feel like that with The Rock. So I came out of The Rock and I went, wait, did I watch that movie? But it was the action scenes that took me out of it. But the one thing that I go, wait, did I like everything kind of seems forgettable. I feel like I'm gonna forget about it, an hour after I watch it. But the thing that resonated the most was Cage's and Connery's performance and the characters, and Ed Harris. But even Ed Harris wasn't given that much screen time. But even within that little screen time that he did have, it spoke volumes. That presence was felt throughout the whole movie. So, but I'm just still shocked that you really enjoyed it as much as you did. Great, I think.
Me too. No, I'm somewhat kidding. I went in, I go into pretty much most of these movies that we watch together with an open mind.
Well, do you also give it like grade on a curve or something? Because I feel like the action genre, and it's funny that we're diving into it as like the first few episodes of this podcast. I think if they're of the genres that you like the most, I don't think that the action genre is right up there quite a bit. I think more the genre, the more as we talked about in the last episode, is the David Lynch type of movies would be up there. I didn't feel like action would be the one that'd be the most appealing to you.
Yeah, they're really not. I don't really like them very much, but I can certainly appreciate them, and I can appreciate a good one. And at the risk of contradicting myself, and maybe I can clarify it a bit, I have nothing wrong with over-the-top action. And in fact, the more over-the-top, the better. But then it has to really own that. So we oftentimes talk about, say, like the John Wick movies.
Right.
Those work for me because they just go all in. And it has a good style. So I appreciate that. Even some of the 80s action movies, they work for me because, again, they own that level of action. It's when you don't have the confidence, and that could be any number of participants, the director, the writer, the actors. If there's not that confidence to really go all in with that, then you have half measures. They get boring. They get stupid. If it's going to be a stupid action movie, then go for it. Just be that stupid action movie. But I don't think a lot of movies go that extra mile to truly own their identities.
But it's interesting that you bring that up because, again, I'm trying to compare it to the movies at the time, but even the movies you just brought up, like some can say, again, the movie that came out before this, the big action hit was Speed. Some can say as soon as you hear the plot for that movie, you didn't even have to see a trailer. You go, this is stupid. There's a bomb on a butt. Like that whole idea, that concept, it might take you out of it before you even want to spend a minute watching the movie. And then you can even compare it to a John Wick of today, where he's going after the whole Russian mob because they killed his dog. This is stupid. So you can immediately write it off for that. But I think you're going more, of course, within the narrative when you're actually on board, when you paid your when you bought the ticket, you're in there watching the movie. Through the narrative, the confidence within the narrative. If you get that sense that the director is really kind of at some point dicking around or whatever, or cutting the momentum of the movie for some subplot that doesn't really work or whatever it would be, it could be a script problem or it could be a problem with the director. You feel that would just kind of interrupt it, or another stupid element in place that would kind of ruin your experience. Any one of those, I guess.
And also it's very important to kind of obey your own rules or kind of create this world where all of the pieces fit. So John Wick fits because if it succeeds at nothing other than just building a world with rules that don't feel forced, I mean, it does that really well. The Rock, it's not that it builds a world, but it's very clear what the motivations are. It's very clear what all of the elements are, what the goals are what needs to be achieved to reach victory
Right.
for the protagonist. If we then, and now we're kind of creeping into the comparison, which is fine. When you look at Con Air, if there are rules, and there are, who can get off the plane, who can get on, those are very arbitrary.
Right.
You can tell from a mile away that those rules were there because it's like slapping duct tape on something to fix like a crack in a pipe. Like you're just covering it up with duct tape. Like it's quite obvious that those story elements are there because they couldn't figure out how to get to the next scene or how to achieve what they wanted to achieve. They were piecing together certain ideas and it wasn't cohesive.
Right, and a lot of screenplays do that. You go that it's contrived, and especially a lot of the movies of the '90s. And at least my take on it is, I keep going back to, well, again, you have the confidence in the writing and the directing, and then you got the actors to support the material. But then you go, okay, where are they making their compromise? And again, all movies are flawed, but where are those compromises being made? And if it is towards like a third act, or Ex Machina kind of thing. Like there are a lot of movies that even they try to implement a twist where it just seems cheap. It's like, and that could take you out of the movie as well. So I do agree with you. I think that in a great example of movies that do it right is the John Wick franchise, because they set up the rules. This is the narrative. There's a confidence within the narrative. We're going to take you through everything, and there's going to be that weight and the stakes there as well, as absurd as it may sound. But that's why the first movie does work. I think the second and third movie kind of take a little bit of the stakes away where the character can literally fall off a building and survive. But then you kind of go, well, if there are sequels to this first movie, like you can't really keep everything as grounded because you're becoming a franchise now. Same thing with most others. So you kind of have to, that's great for that first movie. But I think when sequels, like if there were The Rock 2, The Rock 3, The Rock 4, a lot of what we're talking about right now would be
Rambo.
Yeah, exactly.
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, but that's it with all. You couldn't make the Rambo First Blood, a sequel to the Rambo First Blood, and then not have it go absurd. It would be hard because the whole idea of it happening again, it's like that Die Hard 2 quote. It's like, how could the same thing be happening to the same guy again? It's unbelievably absurd. You know why the sequels are being made for money, but you're on a creative level, you're trying to find a way to make this work, and a lot of the times it can feel like you're forcing a square peg into a round hole. And a lot of the times, I'll be honest, like a lot of action movies, I'm like, even within my own way of, evaluating them, I go, hey, this is beyond absurd. Like you're saying, there could be these elements here that are just so forced, so stupid, like the element in Con Air, like you're talking about. But I go, either I'm on board or I'm not. And a lot of times, sometimes it depends on the energy that I feel in the movie. If it's completely dumb, I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. I can't. I immediately go to Schwarzenegger movies. So True Lies, for instance. I mean, he's got a Harrier jet. He's flying that, or even Bruce Willis, he's surfing a Harrier jet in Live Free or Die Hard. It's like at that moment, it's so batshit absurd that it's like, well, how am I feeling right now? This movie's totally off on another planet. It's broken all of his rules. How do I feel? Where do I go? A lot of the times it just goes into, okay, it might not be a good movie, but it's whether you liked it or not. At least that comes it for me. So do you feel, throwing the question to you, do you feel that there are movies that they'll violate their rules, but the energy and everything else, all the other elements are there? It's stupid, but you're totally on board due to the energy. Do you feel like some movies kind of, for you, they'll work on you even though when they shouldn't?
I would say I could be charmed by a movie that does make some mistakes or does violate its rules to go in directions which I may not necessarily agree with. I can't really think of any movie off the top of my head. But, you said it, and it's true. Movies are flawed, and every movie is guilty of that to some degree. It's very difficult for a movie to just be that airtight. I mean, look, I would be remiss if I didn't say The Rock does kind of do that somewhat by introducing Sean Connery's daughter, right? Like that's a plot point that was done mainly out of convenience. So, it happens all the time.
And again, I think it depends on the genre. If it's a hard drama, well, I'm less forgiving, obviously. But in the action genre, it could be a bad script, but the performances and the directing so good that, again, there's more value to it, or I can be won over. Okay, going back to the movie, it's interesting how we like some people will be thinking we're doing a review of The Rock, and it could be like a 15-second review going, "It was awesome, didn't you think so?" Yeah, and then that's it. But we're kind of diving more into the characters and really what resonates afterwards, because I think that what we're talking about now are a lot of the reasons why this movie does resonate over 20 years later. Another thing that doesn't it's not very conventional is that Ed Harris's character, dies off pretty early on in the movie. But ultimately, of course, we know that, Goodspeed, he saves the day along with Connery. And they've got that, they're going to go their separate ways at the very end of the movie, where Connery literally says, "Well, Stanley, this is where we go our separate ways." And then, there's this nice bond that they had along the way. So I think there's a nice kind of ending there. Anything else that worked for you or didn't in the third act?
No, I mean, I recognize the formula behind it. I mean, I don't think there was a ton of surprises. I think, especially considering that this was just a regular kind of mainstream Hollywood movie, you knew that Ed Harris was going to die because there's no way he's going to get out of that, right?
Right,
Like
you know
he
how.
either needs to somehow redeem himself, but that wasn't going to happen
Right.
because he's the leader. So, he kind of it would be what is it like a pyrrhic victory if Sean Connery was to kill Ed Harris, right? Because, well, maybe that's not the right term, but you wouldn't feel as satisfied because you knew that Ed Harris had this conflict. He wasn't like completely evil,
Right.
so you needed to kind of have him deposed in order to give you that satisfying violent end to the true evil characters, the one who didn't care.
Right.
And so you kind of knew that was coming. I didn't mind that I was able to kind of predict that. That's totally fine because again, it was done well. It was done in a solid way.
It works. I mean, it's surprising how this movie works more than it shouldn't. There are so many different avenues where this movie could have gone wrong, but I think for what it was trying to achieve, it was just really a great ride. And would I call it one of the best action films I've ever seen? No, but it's getting up there. It's on it's part of the better half there. I'd say that. Anything else more you want to say about The Rock?
Nope. I would conclude by saying I think maybe one of the main reasons why I felt so positive towards it is because it didn't annoy me. So because it didn't annoy me, I was like, it then immediately ingratiated itself to me. But yeah,
It didn't.
no, I mean, look, it was a solid movie. I'm not going to go out and tell everyone you should watch The Rock, but if you have to watch The Rock, you won't be angry that you did.
Yeah, and I think I appreciate it more of the action movies that came out, say, within the last decade. Like, can I compare? I would say The Rock is better than most of those movies that have come out. Even the past 2 decades, I'll say. A lot of the times because it is so granted, as we said, the action's more done more on a practical level, as opposed to, like I said, Bruce Willis surfing on a Harrier on an airplane. No, I don't want to see Bruce Willis doing that, but I'd rather see these guys. So yeah, I mean, and one last comparison. Oh, one thing I will say is that I'm really happy about that this is an action movie that didn't get an unrated version. We didn't get a director's cut to The Rock. We didn't need it because they're so confident about the movie. They're so thrilled with it. They're like, nope, this is the movie we set out to make. This isn't a Blade Runner director's cut kind of a deal. This isn't a final cut kind of a thing. This is the movie we set out to make. We're very happy with it. It's out there. No unrated cut needed.
So now that you mentioned it, and I was thinking a bit before we started today about bringing this up or not. I mean, we didn't really have an opportunity, but I'm going to mention it now. I was very confused by that clothed sex scene. I didn't understand why that was in there. It was very weird and really unnecessary. And so when you said that there was no unrated version, that was just a bizarre scene to me. Like I didn't understand why it was there. It didn't need to be. Just crazy stuff.
Well, it's funny. I was going to make another reference to another film at the time that did have that, but you didn't see it. It's Demolition Man. They did it more of in a joking way. But the thing is, part of me thought like maybe it was clothed because normally most movies probably they wouldn't be clothed, but they wanted more kids to come into this movie, so they just had them be clothed. But then again, why is that scene there? Why couldn't it be
it's
just
so infantile and immature, and maybe that's just Michael Bay, but it's just like you're right. Like you would put that in there because you were kind of a moron and like you wanted to have something like a little naughty and risque, but like you didn't go all the way. So
something for the trailer.
Was that even in the trailer?
Yeah, a glimpse of her face, kind of like yeah.
That
But
was just something that I couldn't wrap my mind around.
and I look at that in certain scenes. Like, is this scene necessary? Is it essential to the plot in the movie? Well, technically, yes, because he gets the call where he has to report in. But you could have done that in the scene where he just found out that his new fiance is going to be
Right, or they could just be like hanging out, like spooning in a hammock or something. Like,
But
wasn't she dressed like an angel too?
Yeah,
Like,
with pigtails. Yeah. But I think you need more time for him to process the fact that he's going to be a father, and they needed that extra scene. What else could they be doing? And I just thought
they could be doing any number of
they
things.
could be playing miniature golf, or anything.
Like, they could be cooking dinner together,
Right.
or like any other thing than to have this weird, awkward on a rooftop.
Yeah.
No less. It's just so stupid.
Right, but they had to show that they were very very much in love there, I guess. And this is before, again, Michael Bay did Bad Boys before this. Before that, he did music videos, and he directed Meatloaf's most famous music video, "I Would Do Anything for Love." But I'm happy that there aren't that many scenes in the movie where you can say, "Oh, they can easily take this out." I think it's very much for and it takes a lot of time setting everything up before the payoffs come in. But it works for the B action movie that it is. I don't know if I'd give it a star rating, my 4-star rating. I would give this one a solid 3. Give that a B plus on a grade scale. I don't know if you want to quantify things on a scale. Would you give it any specific rating?
I don't rate.
Nope.
I don't do that.
Yep, you don't do that. Okay. So I don't know if there's anything more we can say about The Rock. Had a good time. I'm surprised because I like hearing well, we're going to get in a conflict about another movie coming up because you've hinted at wanting to watch Face Off. And from a lot of things that we said here, I already feel like you're not going to have a pleasurable experience and you're going to be looking at yourself watching Face Off through that movie. All right, guys. Well, you guys have fun, and I'll see you all next time in the next podcast.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to not miss a single bounce.
We'll catch you next time, and don't forget to leave reviews on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you listen to Movie Bounce.